everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us from all over the world for the virtual EMBA Alumni Program that is running aside the EMBA electives. We know you are all so busy, so we really appreciate you for joining us today. Just by way of quick introduction, I'm Donnell Roy. I'm the Director of Alumni and External Engagement here at the Cambridge Judge Business School. And our team has been organizing this 4-day virtual event along with a broad range of other engagement opportunities every year that we host for alumni, donors, fellows, and board members to the school. It's such a shame that we aren't able to see you in Cambridge this year, but fortunately, despite COVID, CJBS has carried on in its usual nimble and entrepreneurial way. And I'm sure we all have Zoom fatigue by now, but it's so great that so many of you have joined this session. Last time I checked, we had 200 people sign up. I'm sure not all 200 will join, but that's a great number. And we're thrilled to see you and have you here. And of course, speaking of Zoom fatigue, at least I'm not showing up today as a cat. So I think we're off to a good start for this session. We hope that you found the programming interesting so far. Yesterday, we had 9 or 10 coffee chats that were an opportunity for alumni to connect with faculty on research topics and just to connect with each other and engage with each other. And tomorrow, we have some personal professional development opportunities with Christoph and others. And then on Saturday, we'll culminate with a big social event. And we hope many of you will join us for that. But today, we're going to focus on a center at CJBS. As you know, we have several centers at CJBS focusing on a variety of themes, from women's empowerment to circular economies, to social innovation and entrepreneurship, to energy and oil and gas, and many others. So please check out our website to see how you can engage with any of the centers that interest you. But today we're going to hear from colleagues from the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance. And I'm thrilled to welcome Leslie Go, Fellow of the Center for Alternative Finance and Senior Tech Advisor at the World Bank Group. Leslie, it is great to have you here today, and we're so honored to include you among our fellows. Today, Leslie is going to share some of her most recent research around the impact of technology on the future of work, and she is going to be with our very own Professor Raghu Rau, co-founder and academic director for the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance, in a moderated interview session. So please note housekeeping details in the chat tab and submit any questions that you'd like us to discuss afterwards. Thank you so much for joining us again. And now I will hand it over to Raghu.
Thank you very much, Donald. It's a great pleasure to be here in conversation with Leslie. And thank you all for joining our session today. I see we have over 80 participants already from all over the world. That's really nice, especially as Donald puts it, when most of us have Zoom fatigue by now. So I'd like to welcome all the current EMBA students and alumni. And let me start by introducing Leslie. Leslie, as Donald pointed out, is the senior advisor. She's a former chief technology officer for the World Bank Group. She's currently a fellow at my center, the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance at the Judge Business School. She's also a senior fellow at the National University of Singapore, the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. She has extensive international experience. She has advised government policymakers and central banks on the regulatory impact from emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, such as blockchain, the Internet of Things, 5G, cloud and edge computing, and so on. Prior to this public sector role, Leslie had a solid technology career in the private sector. She worked at firms such as Microsoft, at Deloitte, and a bunch of other startups. She's a certified data architect and has worked on many high-profile data and AI initiatives in highly regulated industries such as financial services, healthcare, life sciences, digital government, including smart cities designed for resilience, something I think which is very, very important in today's changing climate. So let me turn the floor over to Leslie at this stage. And Leslie will make a presentation. We'll talk about jobs for the future. How is digital talent developed? And to talk about technology innovation. Thank you very much, Leslie, for being here today.
Thank you very much, everyone. What an honor to be here as well. So I wanted to thank the organizing team at Judge Business School for this honor to be here. And I would have loved to be there in person, but given the circumstance, we all understand how we could try our best to stay connected on Zoom and various other web conferences. My areas of research is focusing on public good at the intersection of technology and policy to operationalize the use of new ideas and tech innovation that will influence and also impact people at the base of the pyramid. And that to me is one of the most impactful areas, especially in emerging countries. So I'm very honored today when I was introduced to speak at this event. I jumped on the opportunity because this is an area of huge importance as we plan our path towards recovery from the pandemic. I know we're still in the hard part of the pandemic, but I think we need to kind of plan ahead as to what the future may be for those of you who are looking into the jobs of the future and how do we prepare ourselves. For me, I have been very fortunate over the years. I spent a lot of time in the tech sector, private sector, and government. I also enjoy the opportunity to learn with high level of curiosity, especially on data and AI. So I'll share some of the areas that I have been researching, also my observation, and we'll open up for questions later on if this is of interest to you. So one of the things that I really keen to touch upon is how the pandemic has affected in many ways digitalization, but more importantly, how it creates a new way of thinking, especially on digital platform in ecosystem that is disrupting the financial sector globally, and how we are looking at various ways of engaging online, away from the in-person experience. And even before the pandemic in China, Alipay and WeChat Pay has been very prevalent. And in fact, when Raghu and I were in China pre-COVID, back in 2019, I believe, in Hangzhou, when we were invited to speak at an event at Zhejiang University, we had a hard time because we don't carry much cash and we don't have the Alipay. So we actually were kind of inconvenienced as a result of that. But in China and many other places, in Indonesia as well, where I'm planning to move there in a few months, hoping that we'll be able to move when it's safe. It's also driven by a lot of the fintech ecosystems, such as Gojek and Grab, which are the ride-hailing company, Tokopedia for the e-commerce platform. So even before COVID, they are already very much a big part of the disruptions in the financial sector. So what would it be like? So let me just fast forward on a few things. During COVID, I have done a lot of work in Asia, and that's where I'm from originally, in Singapore. And the impact and also the response of in many of the Asian countries during COVID has been remarkable, especially because of the deepening use of technology capabilities and innovations in Asia, notably around digital platform and mobile technology in the early response of COVID. I would want to highlight this particular report from McKinsey that talks about the 6 areas where policymakers and firms in Asia rely on technology to safeguard people's health and the livelihood in light of the severe disruptions to the global economy. And technology has also allowed a thorough new way for government to track potential infection cases, tracing their contacts, and quarantining the individuals to stop the virus from spreading in the community. And that technology has also helped many countries in Asia, notably China, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, just to name a few, where the technology adoption has been significant to help them prepare for the current pandemic and future pandemic as well. So that's why I think it's important to see how technology really makes a difference during the pandemic this time around. And there are many areas that the digital technology worldwide has been adopted in many important, significant contribution, including population surveillance, case identification, contact tracing, evaluation of interventions for government policies, the use of mobile connectivity and Bluetooth to create that notifications for the public awareness. Here in DC, we get a lot of these information, but not fast enough, real time, as compared to what is happening on the ground in Singapore. And a lot of it are driven from the necessity, but also the readiness of the technology during the pandemic to really drive greater use of the innovations, and also create the ability to tap upon what is possible and readily available on data and analytics, so that the policymakers can be more informed of the containment policy. Now we're getting into the whole dissemination of vaccination. So we'll definitely see more use of technology in many creative ways. So let's come to this point, the main topic of today, which is the jobs of the future. To me, that is a very important area, because as we are preparing ourselves for what will come ahead of us in the path ahead for the recovery, let's think about what are the areas and what are the skills that we need for the future. So Capgemini actually produced a report even before COVID-19 to talk about digital talents in 3 key areas: hard skills, soft skills, and the kind of new jobs and roles that are created using various data points from LinkedIn profiles and the qualitative and quantitative surveys they have done. So as you can see on the screen, cybersecurity, cloud computing, analytics are what they call the hard skills. But what are the soft skills? That digital first mindset. It is the important elements of what I call the enablers to create the new thinking of how do you tap upon all the Lego blocks of technology to really think about problem solving and applying the technology to good use and to add value. And new jobs are created, such as data science, data architect, chief experience officer, innovation growth hackers. These are new job description that's so different from the traditional ICT skills blueprint. Then there's also another report from World Economic Forum that just came out last year that shed some light into what are the potential ways of new trends with cloud technology, big data, and analytics. And the pace of technology is expected to stay, in fact, accelerate in some areas, because now that we have grown used to and also adopted these as habits, it's really hard for people to go back to where it was, because now we're really going faster in some areas. And also in robotics and artificial intelligence and encryption. During the pandemic, there's a huge surge in cyber attack. And in the United States, here I'm in Washington, D.C., there was very sophisticated cyber attacks on the US government. So there is a heightened demand for such skills now. But as we think about what automation can bring in tandem with the COVID-19 economic impact, we also have to think about what are the potential risks for job changes and balancing the machine and the human elements of this. So this report is very interesting in the sense that it highlights where's the proportion of job changes over time, and how the next generations of skills going to address that need in the labor force, and where could you potentially find space where there is a balance between human intelligence or the soft skills to complement the machine capabilities and the robotic skills that comes together. And I think that is where the key value of fusing the two to solve problems, to apply the human intelligence in going about solving some of the hardest challenges around the world. So maybe we can take it a little closer to an example. in Singapore. I sit on the board for Singapore GovTech and has been advising the government on various frontier on new technology, smart nation strategy that Singapore has put forward for the last few years. And this is the blueprint of what Singapore calls the digital economy blueprint. And there are three key priorities area in order to achieve that. It is to accelerate the small medium enterprise, in particular, the step-by-step approach to help create digitalization of all aspects of the economy. And because the small medium enterprise are the most hit during the pandemic, and there's a lot of stimulus packages around the world in UK, US, Singapore, and various other governments. But I think more can be done besides financial stimulus, and that is to help them go deeper into the digital journey. And the next thing is about making them more competitive and create that opportunity for the economic activities to identify new frontier for the business to thrive with a digital edge. Then the third dimension or pillar is transformation, to position Singapore as the digital technology hub of Asia. And this is done through various mechanisms like connectivity, digital infrastructure, and also the regional capabilities to be able to welcome talents from abroad and also export some of the businesses over to the surrounding countries in the neighborhood of ASEAN community. So recently, Singapore published the job redesign for age of AI as an attempt to create that whole new skills of the future for all ages. Singapore has been #1 on what we call the Human Capital Index, where it's about education and good healthcare program to encourage better quality of workforce for the future. But then there's also the workforce that has been out for some time and will need skills training. So they're put together programs in place for skills future to help the management layers and the more mature population be able to pivot into new skills frontier and help organization be able to adapt to the skills of the future. So all that said, I haven't said one very important thing, and that is gender balance, which is one of my key advocates. Diversity of the workforce foster greater innovation for the long-term success of this digital journey, especially in financial sector, where I work closely with many executives around the world on this area, but we're not quite where we need to be. We only have about 20% of women in the financial services and 23% in board position. So we need to definitely to do more in that frontier. But in order to make that happen, we also need to look at it holistically about serving women as consumers. Imagine that there's about 700 billion revenue opportunity from better serving women as customers, not just as leaders and also part of the workforce. And these opportunities can come from a combination of new product, new services, new market share, and there are undoubtedly many more ways where women's financial needs could be accommodated with this creative power of the young generations to think about how we can include the 50% of the population who are now going to be controlling more wealth, buying power, and financial decisions. So we have a lot more to do. So I would say in closing, from COVID's point of view, I've learned a lot in the last year where I have a chance to step back and write and reflect upon what I learned during COVID and now engaging in various advisory work. I've been very fortunate to have the chance to work from home, but many of the other folks in the informal economy may not have the opportunity. So how can we think about what we call the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum? Well, we have a narrow window of opportunity as we plan the path towards recovery to reimagine, to reflect upon all that we have learned in this last year and reset our world to create a more equitable, healthier, and sustainable, prosperous future for all. And by the way, it's in the next few days is Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year. and it will be the year of the ox. So I welcome and also appreciate this opportunity to share with you my learnings and to welcome the new year on a high note, and hoping that it will be a better and safer year ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Leslie. That was a fascinating presentation. I for one, really appreciated that. And of course, it is Chinese New Year tomorrow, so Happy New Year of the Ox, right? To everybody. Apparently, the Year of the Rat, which was last year, according to traditional Chinese tradition, is not supposed to be, it's supposed to be the first of the 6 years of the zodiac, and it's supposed to be a little troublesome. So maybe there is something to the Chinese zodiac, right? But hopefully, as we move to the Year of the Ox, things are going to turn around. So I look forward to that. But Leslie, let me step back a little bit. Your presentation was great, and I do have some questions on that. But let me ask you a little bit about yourself, and I think the audience would be interested in that as well. Why, as you pointed out in your last few slides, the number of women in technology is relatively small, right? So what made you into a technology career? I mean, was technology a passion from when you were growing up?
Well, thank you for pointing it out. Actually, I started in arts and humanities when I was in Singapore. I actually love painting. I was in a soprano. So, but I do love science and tech and math as well. So Singapore I was very blessed. I had a very good education in Singapore as a good foundation. But it was not until when I migrated to United States as a teenager that I pivoted into STEM education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And my career in tech kind of happened fortuitously because that was the only scholarship available to me as a first-generation immigrant. And that's the only way I could afford a college education. But I discovered that technology is a great equalizer. But unfortunately, though, not everyone has been given that opportunity to realize the full potential of the equalizing force of technology. And many women and girls are not encouraged to pursue that career in technology. So I would like to have a call to action for those of you who have friends who have daughters and nieces and young girls to think about pursuing the education, to encourage them to participate in the workforce, but first have a good base as a foundation in technology. I think that's the only way we could really help change that gender balance. As a strong advocate in women in tech, I see huge potential for women to have a seat at the table. Now that I'm in executive roles, I see it in board of directors. I wanted to make sure that women has a voice in every part of the decision-making process, and to pave the way for more young women to take on leadership position, and also change the stereotype of women, and also a chance for them to change their fate as well.
That's actually a very, I think, inspiring thought. And in particular, this year, because whatever it might have been, COVID has a very unequal impact on men versus women, especially in poorer countries, right? If you have to have one of your children go without education, typically parents would pick the girls to go without education than the guys. So my worry is that the gap which you were talking about might actually get worse around the world following the pandemic. But let's hope that technology allows us in some way to narrow that gap going forward, and that's something to look forward to. But going back to your career, I've noticed you got different parts, right? You got a very, very, varied career. You had an early career when you were doing management consulting. How do you choose? You said it was fortuitous for you got into your college education, but how about your career? Was there anything planned about it? You shifted back and forth from one sector to the other. How did that happen?
Well, it's actually, I'm a planner. I tend to plan 5, 10, 20, 30 years in advance. And it was by design, because I may have been fortuitous to get into technology, but I fell in love with it. And since that point onwards, I've always thought, what would I do when at some point I have more choices in life and the financial independence to do what I want to do? And so I was inspired by this poem, Invictus. If you have never heard of it, I would encourage you to check it out. But the few lines in there: I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. To me, embracing the changes in life, I've survived 3 major economic downturn. I'm hoping that I will survive this 4th one. And that is about remaining resilient and being able to pivot to new directions as life throws curveballs at you. And I also think Darwin surmised that those who survive are not the strongest or the most intelligent, but the most adaptable to change. And so in major pivots in my career, it's about adapting to some of the forces that came to my life. For instance, I've always been an entrepreneur. I wanted to have my own business, so I started one when I left Deloitte, and that lasted for 15 years. And then I realized after 15 years, what do I want to do with my life? I wanted to go into corporate world to figure out what is so hard about corporate world. Well, I figured that out. It was really difficult. But then I built new skills, and how do I adapt and figure out what it is like for women in technology. And I stayed for 7 years in the private sector space, in the corporate world. And finally, at the late stage of my life, it's about higher purpose. And I found that the problem solving skills, the analytical mindset, the engineering background prepared me for something of a greater importance. And that is to take all the learnings that I have, the science and the arts background that I have, into a more holistic problem solving approach. And over time, I found my passion in that growth mindset and the curiosity to build new pathways where I could bring others along. And also, in some ways, it's about karma as well. I actually am going to read the Gita about this whole learnings through all these journeys, right? There has to be a meaning to my own life and why certain things are happening the way it is. And the karmic forces brought great mentors who guide me throughout my journey. And even in the darkest moments where I felt that I needed a helping hand. And you have been a great friend and mentor as well when I was thinking about going to academia. And so that has been a consistent path along the way with great friends and mentors to help me shape the career that I want to build. And now it's about returning back to my root in Asia. As I plan this path forward, I wrote about my reflection in 2020 about creating this new path on disrupting agriculture. I call that making agriculture cool again for Asia. It's part of my learnings from the pandemic, where I saw how food security and the supply chain was impacted during COVID. And I wanted to think about how technology could be used as a way to transform this space, and then perhaps combining agri-tech with fintech, and that will be a new frontier of cross-disciplinary learnings and disruptions potentially.
That's fascinating and inspiring. I was, I was listening to you and I was like, man, I haven't at all been that focused. I mean, my career was entirely stumbling into things. It worked out, it didn't work out, I do something else. But I have to admit, Leslie, I'm very impressed with the way you organize this entire career path. So, the poem Invictus, which you mentioned, is also one of my favorites. So I do like that line. That's a great line. So you've been engaging with policymakers around the world, on a whole bunch of different, data governance, on reg tech and soup tech for digital economy. You've been a board member of the Singapore GovTech thing and a member of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council. So what has excited you about developments in that area?
Well, I've always spent, most of my life in data and AI before it became cool, and we call them artificial intelligence. And there's so much about data that we are starting to uncover the potential. Some people call it data as a new oil, but I really don't think that's a true statement, because it's data can be replicated in so many ways. So it is the new oxygen, because it's not a finite quantity. It's how you use it, but also could potential for misuse as well. So the data trends in small medium enterprise has been fascinating, especially during COVID. And I wrote about this topic quite frequently, especially in the ASEAN community, how data, if we facilitate the data flow from one country to another, it opens up the new marketplace. Singapore is one good example, with a new agreement with Australia, talks about the new digital economy that is potentially possible, that can be unlocked with the data cross-border exchange. And in RegTech, this is an area that I do quite a bit of work in the past with the center at CCAF on RegTech and SubTech. And last year, I was one of the judge for the tech sprint organized by BIS, Monetary Authority of Singapore, and the Saudi G20 presidency, where we look into a few the key challenges of RegTech and SubTech and identify some of the innovators who could help solve the problem, essentially crowdsourcing that solution. But for those who may not know what RegTech and SubTech is, briefly, it's about the application of fintech to regulatory and compliance requirements and reporting by regulated financial institutions. And SubTech is a term for any application in fintech for regulatory and supervisory and oversight purposes. And in many ways, these two sides of the same coin. And the benefits and opportunity in fintech and subtech, the use of technology, is that it really helps enhance and create new efficiency and reduce manual processes and effective use of data that has been growing exponentially. And so in this sector, there are more ways of adopting the technology for the diligence and vigilance in risk monitoring with real-time management, and also improving the resiliency and stability on the broader scale of the financial system. So that's why this is such an important topic. Many central banks are asking about how do we go deeper into this area. And so there's been a lot of work done with different central banks to help them understand and learn from other regions. And I'm actually writing a contribution to IEEE paper on this topic as well. So stay tuned on this. And then lastly, one area that I work on very importantly at World Economic Forum is around data policy, to guide our policymakers and government counterparts to understand what are the potential risk and ethics dimension that we need to think about, ethical use of AI. So I also sit on the ethics committee of the self-regulating organization in Indonesia called FTech, where we have over 350 fintech innovators in the ecosystem, and understanding all the key elements around data privacy. They're about to pass the personal data protection law in Indonesia, and also cybersecurity, a very important agenda that the President Jokowi had talked about as one important element, because Indonesia is one of the most hacked countries during the pandemic. So there's a lot of emphasis around bringing the rigor with technology and policymakers so that we can really mature these areas to form working groups with private sector and big techs and other groups that are contributing in this area. And personally, I'm also very much about looking into the frontier of this area, such as deep fake and disinformation. While I'm an advocate of technology for greater good and change, but there's also so much of the unintended consequences of technology misuse and data abuse. And that because data is growing so ubiquitously and exponentially, there is two sides to the coin, right? And over the holidays, I read this book, which I highly recommend, by Brad Smith, called Tools and Weapons. And this book talked about technology and its implication to jobs, security, and most fundamental human rights. As you witness on January 6th in Washington, D.C., that is a manifestation of disinformation and also potential, manipulation of the polarization in the society. So what can we do about that? And that is to raise a discourse on the topic like this, where we bring policymakers, tech innovators, civil societies, academic, and various key stakeholders together to think about what our future would be like and raise the social contract for the next generation so that we do not create a future state of greater polarization in society. If you really want a sobering lesson, have watch the movie I just watched recently called Social Dilemma. It is very, very sobering. So I think this is one where I'm going to focus more my attention with the platform of the World Economic Forum to really create greater awareness, because we don't have a good solution yet. And I think we have a lot more to do in this frontier.
Thank you very much, Leslie. I mean, yeah, you're right. The movie, The Social Dilemma, is a pretty scary movie. So I also recommend it highly to the audience. But going back to The Social Dilemma, one of the problems which technology has, and as you pointed out, is the fact that, when you have information, you do not realize that you have a completely different information set than somebody else who might be living in your house, because the algorithm decides what you actually get to see. So that is partly causing that polarization. I mean, I don't understand your viewpoint because I don't see your viewpoint. I mean, we may be good friends, but you can see a completely different set of facts that I do. And those problems are being created by companies like Facebook, and they serve you algorithms which keep you engrossed on their site. Now, how would you see this? I mean, in the sense of, should a company like Facebook, should it be regulated in some way to say, okay, they have tried this in the past. They tried getting the algorithms to stop serving polarizing messages to their people, but it actually reduced the amount of time people spent on Facebook, so they turned off the algorithms there. Right? So, can you see any solution to this? I mean, any possibilities?
I think what you brought up is Facebook is just one of the many. I don't want to just isolate to just one company. I think this is one where we really need to put a lot of attention and look at it holistically. I think I would call your attention to Davos, a great session during Davos, where we hear about what are the alarming things that we really need to raise attention to understand, what is, I think this is one that was very nicely said in the speech by the European Commission President Ursula, when she talked about, what is illegal in the physical world should also be considered as illegal on online too. And what is the responsibility of social media and big tech companies out there to make sure that there is accountability to uphold and nurture democracy as we know it today? And how do we defend the institution against coercive power of hate speech and disinformation, fake news, and incitement of violence? So I would encourage you to have a look at that video that's out there right now on YouTube, and also a few others there from the Davos event, because I think individually, right, it's right now we're seeing how the private sector, big techs, social media have now created this kind of not just the ability to create algorithm and personalize that message to you, but also the reach that they have globally, right? It's astounding. But what are the responsibility to create or reduce harm and create greater awareness? I think those are all factors that needs to be in place. And I see this as an opportunity from a regulatory perspective, where we could bring together better solutions. It's probably not a one size fits all, because we really, right now, we have no solution. Is one extreme or the other end of the spectrum. But we don't have a way of kind of creating that right purpose and the right context to address the solution. And so that's why at the working group level at World Economic Forum, we are bringing this to the attention of thought leaders around the world to come together and figure out how can we put our best minds together and create a path forward that makes more sense to have a higher social contract. So I don't think I have the answer to right now, but give it time. We hope that we will raise that awareness and interest among thought leaders to come together with a collective intelligence of diverse talents to bring better solutions for the future.
That's actually something brings to mind something else, which is sort of related to this whole concept of disinformation and so on, which is the other big problem facing our world right now, which is climate change, right? So one of the things which is happening, and in a lot of countries, is that some people are firmly convinced that climate change is not a big problem, and they're cutting down forests, or the Amazon being an example, or in other countries as well, where it's a question of jobs versus the planet. And the other group of people are firmly convinced that there won't be a planet unless you cut back on this. So it sort of ties in there. But how would you expect technology? I mean, part of this, I think, goes back to when you were talking about the Internet of Things. Do you think there is a connection between how we can use sensors, for example, to try to get a better handle on data for climate change? Is that something you're interested in at all?
Absolutely. So a lot of the work I do now in agriculture is not just about food security issue, but also about addressing climate change challenge. So let me just kind of quote a few statistics. Agriculture is a major part of the climate problem. It currently generates about 19 to 29% of the total greenhouse emissions. And most people don't know about that. So without action, that percentage could rise substantially in the agriculture space. And additionally, 1/3 of the food produced globally is either lost or wasted. So addressing food loss and waste is a critical part of addressing climate goals and reducing stress to the environment. So we also, now at the World Bank, I'm also working on this whole agriculture initiative, and there's a part of it is about climate smart agriculture that integrate the approach of various techniques and food security and technology, as you just mentioned, right? Could we use precision farming, Internet of Things, all the imageries from satellites and other new forms of technology and capabilities to help us do better? The answer is yes. The potential is there in 3 key outcomes. One is increase productivity among the agriculture, smallholder farmers, not just the big producer, and also the ability to feed the poor more effectively and to create more equitable solutions for the smallholder farmers so that they don't go out of business completely as a result of poor yields and climate-related issues. And there's also enhanced resiliency that allows them to withstand the drought, pests, diseases, climate-related shocks, and also giving them various forms of economic protections and access to capital. And the last is also reduce emissions. If you really focus on smart agriculture, looking at soil technology and the types of biotech capabilities available for the use of fertilizers and all that stuff, is creating new frontier of opportunity. In fact, on February 25th, I'm going to be moderating a panel celebrating women agriculture leadership. And one of the amazing thought leader is Ponzi from Inari, and they're doing a lot in the biotech space and agriculture. So stay tuned, I'll be posting it on LinkedIn. So I encourage all of you to tune in to that. And her company has done so well now. They're in the, I believe, Series C, raised over 125 million, I suppose. Amazing track record, a woman leader who is leading that change in agriculture. So I think this is a very interesting topic, and thanks for bringing it up, because I think we all have a part to play for climate change in various aspects, in the way we live and the way we consume and the way we invest.
Thank you very much indeed, Leslie. That was an amazing talk, and I think very inspiring for a lot of our alumni. So I really appreciate the time you've taken to talk to them. And of course, from a personal perspective, I've enjoyed my time with you over the years, including that time in Beijing where we both ran out of money and we were trying desperately to find a way back because we were not technologically fit for China. But thank you all for the audience. Thank you very much for attending this session. Thank you all very much.